So if you haven't heard the news, Netflix is making a live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender adaptation, and it looks alright, you know, I don't really have a lot to say about it. I definitely think a lot of people have been pretty unfair to it, but, you know, I'll give it a shot. There's some things I like, some things I don't. We're just gonna have to wait and see when it releases in a few days. But one thing is for sure, even if this show sucks, it'll be nice to finally get to see Avatar: The Last Airbender and its world brought to life. For the first time in live action. And probably the only time. Yeah, that's right, there never was and there never will be another live action adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender. It would be impossible. I mean, surely I would have heard about it, right? Wait a minute. I remember something. I'll be right back. The legends! They were true, but how?
I was sealed away, but I have returned. My power is far too great.
Then there's only one way to vanquish you. I call upon the ancient sword of power! Well, I guess there's only one thing left to do. Begone, foul demon! I'll send you back to the pits of hell. It's gone for now. So, I guess there's another live-action Avatar. Who would have thought? What was once a distant dream is now a frightening reality. I have been trapped behind that door for now, but I don't know how long that thing is gonna hold. With a power that ancient and evil, it might be too much. But wait, I do remember something. As you know, I recently took a trip to the Spirit Library, and I read something about the way to vanquish him. What was it, though? Wait, I remember what it said now. Yes, the prophecy said the only way to defeat him was to make a 2010s low-budget YouTube review about him. Well, I guess that's what I'm doing now. I guess the only way to truly defeat a demon is to trudge through the depths of hell yourself. Avatar: The Last Airbender... Oh, excuse me. The Last Airbender is a live-action film adaptation of the animated series of kind of the same name. Yeah, you're gonna notice that this movie has a real problem with keeping the original names as we get deeper into it.
My name is Ong.
Liar!
Though to be fair, from what I've heard, this particular change wasn't entirely the movie's fault. Apparently they were planning on keeping the name, but ran into trouble with James Cameron, who was making his own completely unrelated Avatar movie. That movie went on to become the highest-grossing film of all time, while Last Airbender only managed to break about $300 million. So, I think it's fair to say who came out on top in the end. The film was directed by M. Night Shyamalan, known for The Sixth Sense. Wait, really? Talk about falling off. Hey, I mean, I guess it's true what they say. Either die here or live long enough to be the director of The Last Airbender 2010. I've always found it funny how the marketing of this movie specifically refers to it as M. Night Shyamalan's The Last Airbender, as if he was the one who created it. Much like how I created Mickey Mouse. See? I made that. Evidently, his daughter was a huge fan of the series, which was why he took on the project. That's sweet, I guess. But man, Thanksgiving must be awkward after how this movie turned out. I mean, I know! But hey, he must have been proud of it to attach his name to it like that, so we might as well give it a shot. So the film opens with... interpretive dance? Yes. Yes, well, this is all very impressive, but, just one question. Why is this here? Oh, was the rest of this movie just taped over someone's karate recital? Seriously, I didn't edit anything. This is how the movie opens. It's just no voiceover, watching silhouettes performing martial arts to music. Of course, if you've seen the cartoon, then you already know what this shot is, but if you haven't, you'll probably just be very confused. Seriously, how do you mess up the opening? Well, you know, maybe they have a good reason for cutting out Katara's speech. Like, maybe they'll include it later as exposition and,
100
no,
years ago, all
there it
respect
is.
was our word.
Never mind.
Press-
Oh man, this text crawl sure is great. But you know what would have been even better? If we were to just take this audio and, you know, move it slightly so that we can at least have something cool and interesting to look at instead of just a wall of text. Like, I love hearing about all the different elements. You know, it would have been cool if, I don't know, they had shot some kind of visual to go alongside it. You know, just a little idea I had. I even think there was a cartoon that did something similar. What was its name again? Oh, right. Like, remember the prologue of The Lord of the Rings where they're showing all the different races in Middle-earth? Imagine if you just took that and removed the narration, so it's just some drawn-out shots of people you don't know doing some cool poses. And then immediately after, you get a wall of text explaining what you saw. It would look stupid. Jeez, M. Night, just hold still for a minute. What, do they not have any tripods on set?
It worked better that time. I thought about Mom. Isn't that strange?
Yeah. Guess so. Just stop doing that stuff around me. I always get wet.
Okay then. I can't really tell what I'm supposed to be feeling here. Like, I think this is supposed to be funny, but everyone is just kind of standing around and looking uncomfortable. The dialogue in this movie feels like what would happen if you edited out the laugh track of a bad sitcom. There are a lot of these strangely long, awkward pauses in between each character's lines that make it hard to get genuinely invested in any of these scenes. Comparing the scene to the original, there's actual build up to the joke. Sokka's attempting to catch a fish using a spear, while Katara manages to catch one using her waterbending. She tries to tell an uninterested Sokka, who ignores her, and as Sokka raises his spear to catch the fish, he ends up popping Katara's bubble, splashing water on himself. And of course, being completely oblivious, Sokka blames Katara for getting him wet. It's a very simple little joke that tells us about the characters from the start and sets the tone. In this scene, the joke is told as awkwardly as possible, with water just happening to land on Sokka off screen. Not for any fault on Sokka's part, like in the original, but just because Katara was acting stupid and hovering the water bubble above Sokka's head carelessly. The joke is no longer about Sokka being arrogant and getting himself wet, losing the fish. Now, the joke just seems to be an awkward bit of slapstick humor. The joke is that he got wet, and that's funny, I guess. Except he gets splashed off screen, so... Sokka gets mad, and...
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Hey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, holy, okay, dude, just chill a little bit. He was about to put the fear of God in her. Was that even part of the script, or was that anger right there just real? As if sibling abuse isn't bad enough, it's made even more confusing when the joke is immediately followed up by what's supposed to be a sort of somber moment where the two remember their mother.
It worked better that time. I thought about Mom. Isn't that strange?
Yeah. Guess so.
What were they going for here? In a matter of moments, we just went from comedic to scared out of our minds to somber back to, I think, what's supposed to be comedy again. Man, this movie is an emotional roller coaster already. I don't know if I'll be able to handle this. Credit where credit's due, though. I do like this line right here about their mother. It's one of the few times that this film uses any kind of subtlety in the dialogue, more so implying how the two feel about their mother and telling us that she's no longer with them. It's just shoehorned into a tonally confused mess of a scene.
My brother and I live in the Southern Water Tribe, which was once a big city. Our father's off fighting in the war. My mother was taken prisoner and killed when I was young.
What? Now you're narrating? Well, never mind what I said about conveying things through subtle dialogue, because the next scene just straight up tells you everything about the characters. Did the filmmakers not think of any other way to communicate this information to the audience? Just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with having narration. Even the original series did this with its opening. But the difference is, it wasn't some constant. The narration in the opening was pretty much only in the opening, where it would make sense to be. It didn't disrupt the natural flow of the story or pull the viewer out of the experience. When it's done here, however, it feels like it's just being used as a crutch to tell the audience essential parts of the story that they didn't know how to communicate naturally. Things like character backstories should be the type of thing that come up organically through dialogue and visual cues. I get that they had to condense the story, but there were plenty of ways they could have told us what happened to Katara's mother without just straight up pulling the audience to the side and saying it directly. Like, for example, maybe when Zuko's ship arrives, we could have a moment where Sokka is going to confront him, and then Katara would be like, "No, you can't, I can't lose them to you like we lost Mom," or something like that. Or maybe when Katara confronts Zuko at the end, you could bring it up that way. Or, hey, maybe even just have Aang and Katara talk about it in some kind of heartfelt scene that sets up the two's friendship. But no, that would be too interesting, and we can't have that, so narration it is. The beginning plays out mostly the same as in the cartoon, albeit with nearly all of the charm of the original completely removed. Sokka and Katara are out hunting and suddenly stumble across the iceberg containing Aang, only instead of crashing into it due to Katara getting angry at Sokka and accidentally waterbending, they instead cause the iceberg to rise to the surface, because Sokka is too stupid to realize that trying to break the ice you're standing on is an obviously horrible idea. These two are very lucky that Sokka developed cognitive reasoning skills out of nowhere to rush them out of there. The collective 6 neurons in his brain were really firing on all sides for that one.
Katara, do not hit that spear!
Yeah, now you care about safety. As the Avatar's power beams across the sky in a flash of light, we get our first look at Zuko and, Oh, yeah, that's the Fire Nation right there. It all looks good to me. Incidentally, I've just been diagnosed as legally blind. So apparently Shyamalan felt that the series was lacking in Indian representation, and thought it would make the film more diverse by changing the race of the Fire Nation. Because I guess a country made up entirely of Chinese people in an American film isn't diverse enough already. Sure, makes sense. Just to be clear, I don't have any problem with adding Indian characters. India is after all a pretty big part of Asia that wasn't really represented much at all in the cartoon. The closest thing we get is this guru character who just kind of shows up before Aang says, I'm out, and screws off. The problem is how we went about adding Indian characters. Rather than just giving the already existing Indian characters more prominent roles, he instead takes the characters who are meant to be Chinese and makes them Indian, directly robbing Chinese viewers of their representation in this movie. It also just puts some of the costume designers in a bit of a tough spot, as the clothing that the Fire Nation wears in the original is very clearly inspired by real-life Chinese garbs and armor. In this movie, however, it doesn't really work, since the Fire Nation is clearly not meant to be Chinese. Because of that, the costumes of the Fire Nation are tweaked heavily to fit the new culture. And credit where credit is due, some of the Fire Nation soldiers look really good. They're obviously very different from the cartoon, but they still look like the Fire Nation for the most part. Just what would happen if you switched the influence behind them to be Indian instead of Chinese. My only real complaint with them is that if the director absolutely insisted that they had to be Indian, they could have doubled down and incorporated a lot of really interesting patterns in clothing originating from Indian culture. Maybe even adding concepts from Hinduism or something, I don't know. But besides that, they look pretty alright, I guess. However, the problem continues to grow when you take a look at the other characters in this movie, and what aspects of them they changed as well. Because wouldn't you know it, not only did they change the Fire Nation's race, but nearly everyone else's as well. This is easily the most controversial part of this movie, the whitewashing. It's a detail that you've no doubt noticed at this point in the review. Aang, Katara, and Sokka are all portrayed by white actors. Now, for those unaware, this is what the characters look like in the cartoon. Notice anything off? Yeah. I'm not going to go too in-depth on this topic, it's just a very loaded subject that way more qualified people than me have already discussed in great detail. In short though, this is a problem that has plagued Hollywood for quite some time, giving diversity roles to white actors, a practice commonly known as whitewashing. Thankfully they don't go too far with it here, like they don't put Sokka and Katara's actors in brownface or anything. However, it's still pretty offensive when you remember that almost all of our good guy characters have been made white, and all of our bad guy characters have been changed to be dark skinned. Oh dear. If it had only been the Fire Nation or only the Water Tribe, then I would probably be more understanding, but it's the fact that they change both of them, making all our good guys white and all our bad guys dark-skinned, that makes it feel like it was done intentionally. It's just a weird change. It would have been one thing if the source material already wrote it that way, but it's the fact that they deliberately changed the characters that makes it feel like it was done maliciously. Either way, the decision completely misses part of what made Avatar popular in the first place. Of course, most of it came down to just being a great story, but along with that, a lot of its appeal stemmed from its use of Asian culture for inspiration. It was a series that introduced foreign concepts to children in the West in a way that people hadn't really seen at the time. It also had many themes of tolerance and acceptance of other countries. The entire plot revolves around fighting an imperialist dictatorship that is attempting to genocide the other nations. Cultural diversity is a core theme of Avatar's message, and so to just completely whitewash the main cast is such a huge miss in so many ways that completely fumbles part of what makes Avatar so special. So, getting back to the film, the next scene begins in the Water Tribe, where Aang is recovering now. And now, I feel like I should address another aspect of this movie that you've probably caught on to at this point, the costumes. Now, I don't want to be too harsh here, because the costumes themselves are pretty well made for the most part. They can look pretty cool at times, and you can tell there was a lot of effort put into creating them. I have nothing but respect for any of the costume designers who probably slaved away making the outfits for this disaster of a film. But even though I can recognize that these are very technically impressive, the costumes have one fatal flaw that prevents them from reaching their true potential. They don't look like Avatar. But why is that exactly? Well, in my opinion, it comes down to a lot of different factors, but mainly I would say the thing which separates the costumes here from the original is the distinct lack of color. It's present in different characters, but I think it's especially obvious with Aang. In the cartoon, the colors of Aang's costume are used to portray different aspects of his character. The bright yellow and orange are colors typically associated with happy emotions and altruism. Aang stands out in this world as a shining light in the darkness. He's the last to wear the clothes of the air nomads, and by extension, the last in his world to wear these bright colored clothes that evoke happiness and joy. It's an extremely subtle part of his character design that feels like it was criminally undermined in this movie. The colors of Aang's garbs have now been toned down to be darker, less of a bright yellow and more of a sandy tan. The orange has been removed entirely and replaced with a dark red robe with a weathered texture that is meant to make Aang appear more like an old master. It definitely isn't helped by these terrible looking tattoos on his body. In the cartoon, the tattoo is a solid blue arrow, but I guess that was too fun for this movie, so they replaced it with a tattoo that now more vaguely resembles an arrow. And we wouldn't want to overstimulate them. Now, I actually have no problem with adding more detail to the arrow. I like the idea of making it better resemble real-life tattoos of ritualistic significance. In fact, that's exactly what the new show seems to be doing, and I honestly think it looks pretty good. But you need to have a good balance. The arrow is such a huge part of the iconography of this show. It's the type of thing you can recognize immediately from distance. It's bold, it's fun, it's colorful, it's unique. So, of course, we couldn't have that. Look, have all the cool patterns you want, but if I have to squint to even see that this is an arrow, that's a problem. It also doesn't even look like they kept the color. It looks more black than anything. If it is blue, then you're gonna have to get pretty close to tell. As for Katara and Sokka, their costumes aren't terrible, but it is a little annoying that the scene that introduced them has them wearing brown coats. That's obviously a nitpick, but I always loved how the different nations were color-coded in the original show. It's a detail that in hindsight is pretty obvious, but one that I never really noticed until I rewatched the show. In the OG, there was a lot of attention put on even the smallest details. Things like what the color of the Water Tribe's coats are is something that nobody except weirdos like me is going to care about. But it adds to the colorful feel of this world. You can tell what nation a character is from just from the color of their clothes. I think that's a really cool detail, and even though it isn't essential, I don't see the point in changing it. With that out of the way, let's get back to the movie. So we get a little scene between Katara and Aang in this here igloo, where she asks him where he's from, how he got here, yada yada yada. It's pretty standard, but it's essential to establish a friendship between Katara and Aang, so that it's impactful when he gives himself up for them. So I'm okay with... What? Oh.
And they brought their machine.
Oh, they're here? That was fast. Would have been nice if we had just a little time to breathe before rushing into things, but I guess they must not have had enough time. Do I even need to explain why this is terrible? In the original, they built up a genuine friendship between Katara and Aang. You see the responsibilities that she has to take on after her mother passed. Aang is the only person in her life who she can just be a normal kid around. He encourages her waterbending abilities when no one else does. and even tells her that he can find her a waterbending teacher. It's short, but you get a neat little friendship built up between the two before they're confronted by the Fire Nation. As it is here, I barely know Aang, and neither does Katara. He doesn't really do anything to make her laugh or encourage her waterbending abilities. It's never even brought up throughout this entire interaction, and we're supposed to believe that Katara would cast off everything to go help him now? It's so rushed and forced. Sokka tells Aang to stay put until the coast is clear. Okay? But why? At this point in the story, they don't know that he's an airbender, let alone the Avatar. Why would they think that the Fire Nation is after Aang specifically? I guess maybe because he came out of that iceberg, Sokka just figured he was important? But I don't know, I don't get what the point of this was. I mean, ultimately, as we're about to see, he's just immediately found anyway, so there was literally no point in having him hide. This would be such an easy fix if we had a scene of Gran Gran or someone recognizing the tattoo markings and realizing he's an airbender. But whatever, Zuko arrives and informs the audience, I mean, the townspeople, that he is the Prince of the Fire Nation and heir to the throne. He then delivers one of the best lines in cinema history.
Bring me all your elderly!
I got it framed. You know, he should really get that rash checked out there, maybe get some cream for it.
Grandma!
Call me Gran Gran.
Why is Sokka suddenly acting like the responsible one here? Shouldn't he be trying to rush the Fire Nation right now with his boomerang? Why is he the one trying to talk down Katara and convince her not to fight when you'd think it would be the other way around? Or, wait, maybe it was.
Sokka, don't.
His characterization in this film is so confusing. Also, did they just call him Sokka?
Sokka.
Alright. Sokka it is then. It's weird that this is the first time we've heard Sokka's name within this version. So the soldiers find Aang hiding and bring him to Zuko. And it's important to note that at this point in the story, Aang should be asking so many questions. From his point of view, he's only been in the iceberg for maybe a few days. He should be completely oblivious to the war and the Fire Nation's betrayal. You'd think he would be asking why the Fire Nation is doing this and trying to reason with them. Why wouldn't he tell them about how he has friends in the Fire Nation, saying he's sure they can work things out? In the original, Aang already found out about the 100-Year War at this point. He would have already been aware of the horrors that the Fire Nation is capable of from exploring the old Fire Nation ship and seeing the weapons of destruction inside. In the original, Aang already understands that the world has changed at this point, and that the friends he knew in the Fire Nation are long gone. Here, however, he has no knowledge of any of this, and this scene just feels awkward, like Aang is just going along with the flow because the plot needs him to.
I'm taking you to my ship. If you don't come, I'll burn down this village.
You know, it would be a lot more intense of a scene if we knew or cared about any of the people in this village. If, you know, we had like a single scene with them. In fact, now that I think about it, they don't even tell us who Katara and Sokka's grandmother is before she's yanked away by the Fire Nation. Lovely. So Aang agrees to go with them as long as they don't hurt anyone. Well, easy come, easy go.
They were looking for someone old, and they were looking for someone with the same markings the boy had.
Why does everyone in this movie talk like a robot? Would it have been so hard to rewrite that line so he doesn't say they were looking for twice? Like, I'm not a master writer or anything, but even I could come up with a better line. Like, for example, it sounded like they were looking for an old master, but the moment they saw that kid's tattoos, they turned around and left. Or they were looking for someone older. They only left us alone because that tattooed kid agreed to leave with them. Were they here for him? Like, that's not Shakespearean writing or anything, but at least I'm trying here, for God's sake. Or, if you really don't want to change the script too much, why not just, they were looking for someone old, they wanted that boy with the tattoos too. I mean, even then, that's a pretty clunky line, but it's still better than...
They were looking for someone old, and they were looking for someone with the same markings the boy had.
that. So Katara reminds us again of her dead mother, saying that they dragged their mother away the same way they took Aang. Even though that isn't what happened, but hey, I'm glad she's expositing it in detail now. Mainly because it really drives home how pointless that narration earlier was. Katara says that, what was his name again? Is their responsibility now, because they found him. Katara, you don't even know this kid's name. Yet again, a big problem with how rushed this story is. I can believe that Katara would care just out of the goodness of her own heart, yes, but not that she would leave her home and entire life behind for a kid she feels somewhat responsible for. You shouldn't typically base the motivations of your characters solely on wanting to do the right thing. It's not that it's necessarily out of character, but it's not very interesting. The reality is that people are flawed. They rarely, if ever, are only motivated by doing the right thing. Even someone as good and kind-hearted as Katara is somewhat selfish. Deep down, part of why she wants to follow Aang is because she believes he can find her a waterbending teacher. She wants to save the world and her friend, yes, but there's also an element of personal gain in it that makes her feel like a real kid. But with Katara here, there really isn't anything else motivating her. She barely knows Aang, and yet decides to leave her home she's lived in her entire life, as well as all her friends and loved ones, to fight for him. No 14-year-old would realistically act like this. Not when we haven't been given any reason to believe that she is dissatisfied with her life in the Southern Water Tribe, nor that she sees Aang as an escape from her responsibilities, like in the cartoon.
What would you do if they tried taking me away?
I'd kill them all.
Dang, Sokka. Okay, I guess. I can't be the only one that feels like this guy is a bit unstable, right? He goes from an abusive brother, to actually brain dead, to a responsible voice of reason, to a psychopath, all in the course of about 20 minutes. This whole movie, he just looks like he's fighting off some kind of intrusive thoughts. I want to get this guy checked out sometime before things get too far. Well, anyhow, Katara is pretty hell-bent on saving Aang for some reason, but they can't exactly catch up to the Fire Nation in their little fishing boats. So the two are in a bit of a predicament here. All hope is not lost, though, because suddenly, they notice some children playing with Appa in the distance. Man, you can tell these kids were really shaken up by that whole almost being killed thing. And here we are. We're finally getting a good look at live-action Appa. Man, I'm just excited. I mean, as bad as this movie is, you can't possibly get Appa wrong. So, you know, if this movie will have one saving grace, it'll be finally getting to see Appa. What? Why? What is this? Who thought this was a good idea? So yeah, this is supposed to be Appa, and the only thing I can think about when I see this creature is the question, was it really that hard? The thing about a CG character is that you don't need to find a lookalike actor or go through any of that. Since you're already creating it using CGI, I don't see any reason why you can't make it look as close to the character as you want. Sure, you have to account for things like texture and stuff, but I don't see what any of that would have to do with his eyes, size of his nose, or his horns. You know, stuff that makes him cute. They can't have cute animals, that's too unrealistic. Here's this terrifying monster instead. Why do his eyes look like they're staring into my soul? Why is his head so small compared to the rest of his body? Why does he look like this? Back at the Fire Nation ship, Zuko's preparing a test to determine if Aang truly is the Avatar. Iroh tries to calm Aang down by assuring him that he's taken the test hundreds of times, and it'll only take a minute. But this line is confusing to me. Is Iroh saying that he's conducted the tests on others hundreds of times, or that he's taken it hundreds of times? I'm assuming based on context clues that it's the former, but if not, why was Iroh taking a test to determine whether or not he's the Avatar? Also, I probably don't have to mention it at this point because honestly nobody in this movie looks like their counterparts, but this guy looks nothing like Iroh. Iroh in the show is a gentle old man with a fighter's spirit. He's the classic Eastern trope of the old master who appears like a weak old man. Despite not appearing very threatening or strong, he's one of the most powerful warriors in the Fire Nation. So, with all that being said, I really feel like I shouldn't have to explain why casting him as Mr. Jared Leto wannabe over here was a bad idea. But perhaps I shouldn't even be looking at him as Iroh in the first place because apparently this character's name is Iroh.
My name is Iro.
So I guess it doesn't really matter anyway. So, we cut back to Sokka and Katara speaking with Gran Gran, and I just have nothing to say here. I literally could not care any less about this scene than I do now. It's just repeating what we already know. There are no real character interactions happening in this scene, no warm goodbyes or any genuine emotion. It's just more exposition about how the waterbenders were taken away and Aang is special and I just don't care. The only thing of note here is that Gran Gran reveals that Aang is an airbender, something that, you know, you could have just shown by having him do a little bit of airbending while he was with them. She talks a little bit about the spirit world because for some reason she knows about that, and that's it. It's just exposition to move the plot along. Don't even see them embrace her or say goodbye or anything, because the characters care about as much about Gran Gran as we do. Back on Zuko's ship, Iroh conducts his test to tell if Aang really is the Avatar. What is that test exactly? Well, I'm glad you asked. So apparently if you lay all 4 elements in front of the Avatar, they'll start levitating toward him like some kind of magnet. Could they not think of any other way to write this? So when the test is successful, Zuko pulls out the old switcheroo, revealing that he'll be taking Aang back to the Fire Nation. Aang, rightfully mad, brings up the fact that he said he could go free after the test. But then Zuko pulls his ultimate trap card when Iroh specifies that he would let him go once the test was over, only if the test was unsuccessful.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
Man, you're telling me the guy who threatened to burn down a village lied to me? You just can't trust anyone these days. But Aang is having none of this and does that and escapes. There's a little fight scene eventually ending with... He'd been talking about it for a while, but I didn't think he'd actually do it. But psych, he's actually alive, escaping using his glider at the last minute. And then Sokka and Katara swoop in out of nowhere, riding Appa to pick him up. There are a lot of scenes in this movie that I feel like were originally meant to be somewhere else in the film. So, just to recap, this was the last time we saw Appa. Aang was just taken away, Katara and Sokka want to save him, but don't know how to catch up to the ship. They see Appa flying. So, with how this part was made, you would think it's there to set up the two flying on Appa to save Aang in the next scene. And that's actually really good. You don't have to specifically show Sokka and Katara mounting Appa. Cutting away like that, the audience can put together how they're gonna rescue Aang just by how the scene ends. It's a good use of setup and payoff in between scenes, but for some inexplicable reason, they decide to put that stupid scene with Gran Gran in the middle. Any urgency that might have existed between these scenes is completely killed, because apparently before immediately mounting Appa after the cutaway like you would expect, they had enough time to go sit down in an igloo and listen to Gran Gran tell them about the spirit world. Now, you might be thinking, well, they needed to include the goodbye with Gran Gran, but they don't even do that! This scene is just exposition. They don't even say goodbye. It's just there to explain things like Aang is an airbender, as if there was no other possible way to communicate that. And if you really needed to include the goodbye, have it happen while the two are mounting Appa, then you could have a nice goodbye without disrupting the sense of urgency. You know, kind of like what the cartoon did.
The Fire Nation is up to something.
Really?
We'll come with you.
I could take you back to the village.
We're going with you.
Well, that didn't take much convincing. And so, Aang and crew narrowly escape the Fire Nation with their lives and begin on their adventure. Oh, Aang, you rascal.